the 1800s, a fox hunter in Ohio was out with his foxhounds in the woods around Hillsboro. After catching the scent of a fox trail, his dogs gave chase, only to stop in their tracks at something mysterious in the ground. The fox hunter stopped, knelt down, and examined the ground where his dogs now nervously sniffed. After a closer inspection, he discovered what made his dogs so nervous. Realizing the extent of this find, he had no idea that ancient secrets were beneath his feet. Secrets that, if the public knew, could rewrite history. You won't want to miss this one. In 1894, a local farmer named Warren Cohen, who resided in Hillsboro, Ohio, was out fox hunting like any other day. With him were his trusty foxhounds, and Warren traveled on foot instead of horseback, which is more traditional with fox hunting. He trekked through dead underbrush and fallen branches. This was early spring, so the foliage had yet to grow. Immediately, his dogs stop and start acting strangely. They begin sniffing around frantically. Warren realizes his dogs caught the scent of a fox. Quickly, his dogs begin moving up an incline, following this trail. Warren followed his dogs up the incline, exhausted as he navigated the uneven terrain. The dogs were excited and happy, and they sniffed and pawed at the ground, but as they reached the crest of the hill, their behavior changed abruptly. The hounds went from eagerly running around, confident they'd found the trail of a fox, to one of anxiety. They circled an area of disturbed earth, and their noses began twitching nervously. Warren was very confused by this behavior because they never acted this way. He'd taken these foxhounds out here many times to hunt before, and they'd never acted like this. In confusion, he suspected this wasn't typical fox behavior. So what could this mystery be? As he drew closer, he noticed something unexpected about the ground. Strange and off-putting rectangular patterns were barely visible beneath the leaf litter and early spring grass. Warren knelt and brushed away the debris with his calloused hands. His fingers met something hard and smooth, too smooth to be a natural rock formation. This was strange. Eager to get to the bottom of what this was and why his dogs were acting strangely, Warren cleared more of the area. He squinted his eyes, and to Warren, this appeared to be a large slab of limestone. That's odd. Even stranger is that it was arranged in a bizarre pattern. He's thinking to himself, what in the world is this? His dogs were still acting nervous, whining and pacing around like they wanted to leave. Warren stood up, wiping his dirty hands on his pants. He knew he couldn't just leave this be. It was too strange, too important. But he also knew he couldn't do much more without proper tools. He looked around, trying to memorize exactly where this spot was. The old oak tree to the north, the oddly shaped boulder to the east, he'd use these as markers. However, after some thought, Warren knew what these were. As soon as the weather permitted, he'd return and take care of business. Well, within the coming days, the weather was permitting, and Warren gathered up all the tools necessary to do the job. This time, instead of bringing his foxhounds, he brought his tools and wits. Finding the markers he had memorized before, he quickly located the spot where these limestone slabs lay under the cold earth. Working quickly, he began digging, and it wasn't long before he realized there was more than one. Moreover, there was a series of these. He couldn't believe it. However, he felt watched during his excavation and the entire journey from his home to this location. He felt nervous. There was something off. It could be the atmosphere. Maybe it was the unknown. He started to pick up and understand why his dogs were acting off. Warren realized these limestone slabs followed a specific dimension, 2.5 to 3 feet long and a foot wide. Each of them was set a foot apart. There was something important under these slabs, and Warren was determined to uncover it. With a little effort and more time opening each slab, Warren realized something horrific. These were graves, each containing a skeleton with bizarre properties. Moreover, in these graves were tools like stone hatchets, beads, and even ornaments. Warren even found several large flint spears and arrowheads. However, he did not find them nested alongside the skeleton like you would in some cultures where they are buried with their possessions. These arrowheads were in the ribs and told him this was a warrior who had died in battle. Another skeleton was equally as strange as the first in one of the graves. Near the shoulders were several bizarre pipes and pendants. Warren realized the gravity of this discovery, and it was featured in the New York Times. Folks, it only gets stranger from here, and I promise you there are more twists and turns. Going back 3 years to 1891, an American anthropologist and professor named Frederick Ward Putnam excavated one of the nearby burial mounds. In the same area, Warren made his discovery. Putnam came across a skeleton with bizarre features as well. Interestingly, he began to note that this skeleton had one unique characteristic other than its size: a double row of teeth. Putnam's excavation in the area continued, revealing several other skeletons that were not of typical size. These were not just larger than average, but towering at 7 feet or more, a size rarely seen in human remains. Going back to 1872, when one report appeared in the historical collections of Noble County, Ohio, described strange remains. Apparently, 3 skeletons measuring at least 8 feet in height were discovered in the same area. And guess what? They had something in common with what Mr. Putnam would discover some 19 years later. They had double rows of teeth. Folks, these are not outliers. At least 17 reports in Smithsonian ethnology reports of similar outsized skeletons over 7 feet in mounds found in this area. But what does all this mean? Well, here's where we get into the plot twist. The area in question is famously known by its nickname, the Serpent Mound, and it is located in rural Adams County, Ohio, sitting on a plateau overlooking Brush Creek. However, it's not that this mound resembles a snake that spans nearly 1,400 feet, it's the mystery itself that is so baffling. You see, this is known as an effigy mound, a specific kind that is created in the shape of an animal. Even more bizarre is that we know very little about it, no more than we did when it was first excavated in the 1800s. Some legends talk about this mound and the surrounding area possessing powerful supernatural energy. While we can't verify supernatural energy, we can document gravitational and magnetic anomalies that do occur in this area. This leads us to suspect that the construction of this mound was placed here intentionally. It's getting wilder. There have been long-standing stories of strange weather patterns and anomalous lights all around this mound. More so, there have been a plethora of strange UFO sightings and other weirdness that have gone on. Could this have anything to do with it being constructed along the impact crater of an ancient meteor strike? The prevailing belief is that the mound was built between 500 BC and 200 AD by the early woodland Adena culture. While the mound itself wasn't a burial site, the smaller mounds in the area were. Here's the twist. The remains discovered weren't your typical human skeletons. Their unusual nature has sparked speculation that a race of giants once inhabited this area alongside the natives. Unfortunately, there's so little information on the history of the Serpent Mound and the surrounding region that we can only speculate based on what has been found. The Serpent Mound and all the anomalies and discoveries connected to this area remain a mystery. However, in recent years, another unnamed mound in a top secret location has been the source of a highly powerful and sought after liquid. A liquid coveted by ancient cultures, giants, and even interdimensional beings. Today's sponsor, AG1. Now, I know what you're thinking, another supplement, but AG1 is different, and here's why I trust it. AG1 is backed by multiple research studies. The team does the research so I don't have to. And even aliens have shown a strange obsession with it. In fact, AG1 is how other alien races have achieved such greats like time travel, spontaneous creation, traversing various planes of existence. Just kidding. But one of the reasons I like AG1 so much is because the ingredients are really clean. And when you put clean ingredients in your body, you feel good, and the impact is remarkable. There's the reason the elites go to for foundational nutrition is adrenochrome and AG1. In fact, a research study showed that 97% of participants felt more energy after just 30 days of using AG1. That's pretty impressive.
I'm not going to lie. Out of all these supplemental green drinks I've ever tried, this actually tastes pretty good. It doesn't even taste like green powder. It tastes like it's almost kind of got like a Gatorade, Powerade-ish kind of flavor to it. It's interesting.
Sure, they weren't opening portals and altering timelines, but hey, maybe that takes a few generations of use. But don't just take my word for it. I want you to experience the AG1 difference for yourself. Head to the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen to get a 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 AG1 travel packs free with your first subscription. AG1. It's not a mystery, it's just good science. For this next story, we're going to extend Ohio's limits to Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, for just a bit. Fortunately, Kecksburg is only roughly 100 miles from Ohio, so we'll make it count. On December 9th, 1965, William Davis and his wife were getting ready to go home after a long day of work and going to the grocery store to pick up some last-minute items. It was another ordinary day in the week. William and his wife get in their car, they're driving back home, and they're engaged in conversation about their plans for the upcoming weekend, and visiting some family they haven't seen in a while. About 15 minutes goes by, and William pulls up in the driveway. He turns the car off and pivots his body to open the door to step out. As William starts to move, he can hear his wife directly behind him start screaming. Out of reaction, he looks at her and sees her pointing upwards to the sky. His eyes follow where she's pointing, and this large, fiery object is soaring through the sky. Within seconds of watching the sky, the realization that it's not just traveling straight, but it's about to crash down into the earth and very close by. A few more seconds go by, and bam! Whatever this object was smacks into the earth, sending a shockwave that could be felt for miles. William snaps out of his gaze. He sees that many of his neighbors, like him, are also watching this happen. The impact shook the ground beneath William's feet, and a loud boom was audible. His wife started whimpering and crying, her hand now clutching William's arm, and for just a moment, a strange silence settled over the neighborhood. The occasional dog barking could be heard in the distance. He knew he had to investigate and ensure that no one was hurt. He turned to his wife, told her to stay put, and said he would check it out, and departed. In an act of quick thinking, William jumped back into his car, the engine still warm from their recent return. His hands trembled as he turned the key, overcome with all the things this could be. What if this was a bomb sent by the Soviet Union? After all, this was in the Cold War era. All these thoughts raced through his mind then. Even the familiar engine noises did not calm his nerves. He peeled out of the driveway without a word to his wife, who stood frozen on the porch, and William's eyes darted between the road and the sky, searching for any sign of where the object might have landed. He had an idea of the general direction, but the disturbing observation of how empty the streets were bothered him. After about 10 minutes of tense driving, following his gut instinct and the fading trail of smoke in the sky, William arrived at a large plot of undeveloped land on the neighborhood's outskirts. The car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a war-torn landscape. What would typically be thick foliage was now a ghostly scene of sparse dead trees. The impact had cleared a significant area. Branches lay scattered across the ground, some still smoldering. The air was thick with the bitter smell of burnt vegetation, or whatever vegetation there was in December, and something else, something metallic and chemical. While thoughts of this being the result of a bomb sent from the Soviet Union faded in his mind, the feeling in his gut that something was wrong only intensified. William killed the engine, but left the headlights on, and as he climbed out of his car, he could immediately sense how still and unsettling this scene was. He squinted in the darkness, trying to make out any sign of what he was looking for, and there was something else in the air. Something he couldn't identify. the smell of smoke, and something else. Acrid and unfamiliar filled his nostrils. As he approached the woods, William saw an orange glow peeking through the trees. After slowing his pace, William became aware of the potential danger. What if it was a plane crash, or worse, some kind of military accident? He moved cautiously, and the only light that aided him was his flashlight. A few more moments of looking, a few more steps, and William stopped. He saw something he couldn't explain. In a small clearing, partially obscured by fallen trees and disturbed earth, was an object unlike anything William had ever seen. It was roughly acorn-shaped, about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, with a metallic surface that seemed to shimmer despite the dirt and debris covering it. The object was steaming, wisps of vapor rising into the night air. He felt drawn to it. As he edged closer, he saw the surface clearer. The object appeared covered in hieroglyphics, strange symbols of an ancient and forgotten language. They pulsed faintly with an eerie blue glow. Whatever William was looking at had him in a trance. That trance was soon broken by the sound of branches breaking behind him. Whirling around, William shone his flashlight at the approaching strangers and saw it with several of his neighbors. They, too, were coming to see what this was. Their expression was the same as William's. Their eyes are wide, their mouths are open, and one of the men asks William, "What on God's green earth is that thing?" Before William could answer, a low hum began emanating from the object. The symbols pulsed brighter, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated. All of them started yelling and running, and as if on cue, all the men could hear the distant sirens coming. As the other men ran and took off back to their cars, William stopped and turned around one last time to look at the object. A wave of dread washed over him, making his stomach churn. He just knew he shouldn't be here. Before he could make it back to his car, strange black vehicles were already pulling up to the scene, and men in suits were approaching William. As they approached him, he saw their faces were cold and expressionless. To say he was intimidated was an understatement. Before William could speak, he was quickly ushered by these men away from this area, back to his car, and threatened not to talk about what he had seen to anyone. As he's being forcefully taken back to his vehicle, William can see men approaching the object in hazmat-type suits. One of these men leaned in close to William and told him firmly,
"Mr. Davis, what you've seen here tonight is a matter of national security. You will not speak of this to anyone. Not your wife, not your friends, not even your priest. Do you understand?"
At this point, William is terrified. Not only do these men know his name, but it's evident they know a disturbing amount about his life and family. He feels sweat pouring down his face, his mouth dried, and he slowly nods. The man's demeanor seemed to instantly change. His expressionless face changed to a frown, and his tone became aggressive as he gripped William's arm painfully.
"If you breathe a word of this to anyone, there will be consequences. Unimaginable consequences."
And then this man said something to William that shook him.
"Your wife, Mary. It would be a tragedy if anything were to happen to her, wouldn't it?"
Without another word, he was shoved into his vehicle. William didn't hesitate. He started his car and drove off while these men never broke eye contact with him. When William pulled into the driveway, his wife was still on the porch waiting for him. He exited the car and slumped to the front door like he was still in shock. William held his wife in silence for several moments as the sounds of emergency vehicles and helicopters could be heard in the distance. He had no way to explain the events of that night and knew he could not tell his wife what it was. William knew that whatever happened next, the peaceful life he'd known in Kecksburg was about to change forever. The object in the sky was just the beginning of a mystery that would haunt this small Pennsylvania town for years to come. What witnesses saw that evening was a large acorn-shaped object with strange markings. It was described as being about the size of a small vehicle, and while it did have a strange smell, A bizarre hissing sound accompanied it. Some eyewitnesses described the smell as specifically similar to kerosene or burnt metal. Soon after the object crashed, the military arrived on the scene and quickly removed and transported the object to an unknown location. The entire scene was cordoned off and became off-limits to civilians. Much of the public demanded answers, but the government was silent. Eventually, the official explanation to the public was that it was just a meteorite, and that the public should not be so quick to assume it was anything other than. But this was something multiple people witnessed. Strangely, the fact that there were markings or writing on this foreign object says a lot about what this could have been. In fact, witnesses explain and describe the markings as similar to ancient Egyptian symbols and hieroglyphs. Many of those same eyewitnesses also witnessed military personnel examining them closely, preparing them for transportation. Most disturbing is that the military had removed this object so quickly that it appeared as if they had prior knowledge of its landing and had planned to retrieve it after it crashed. Interestingly, following the government's official explanation for the strange event, there was never once official documentation released to the public that supplied evidence to support its claim. For many who knew there was more to the story than what was told, it was their smoking gun that a cover-up was involved. Fast forward to more recent times, the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, has been investigating this incident, interviewing multiple eyewitnesses. Moreover, the Pennsylvania state legislature passed a resolution requiring government documents relating to this incident to be released. In recent times, NASA, out of all companies, had documents related to the 1965 Kecksburg UFO crash that they were tightly withholding. Unfortunately, for NASA, it took legal recourse to obtain documents. In October of 2007, in a settlement, NASA was required to provide hundreds of documents to an investigative journalist named Leslie Kean. It took a while for NASA to gather all their documents together, but as of August 2009, they had given her everything. Interestingly, she wrote a paper and posted it online, explaining the lengthy legal process of digging into these documents. But sadly, it appeared as if she couldn't find much, at least anything that would pinpoint her in the direction of answers. She noted that many of the files were either missing or destroyed. Well, that's funny. Surely the American government wouldn't do anything to try and hide information from the public regarding an event as benign as a small meteorite, right? Why would they? Well, here's my question to all of you watching this. Why is it that in various State Department documents, NASA appears to have played a role in the recovery of this meteorite? Come on, guys, are you telling me NASA's in on this too? Next, you're going to tell me the mainstream media lies to us. To narrow things down even more, it appears unlikely that the object in question was not a Russian satellite, at least according to data from the Russian Space Agency and U.S. Space Command. You need to understand that this event was so significant that multiple books and documentaries were written about it. In fact, a book that many of you will probably recognize is The Day the Earth Stood Still at Kecksburg, written by Stan Gordon. Unfortunately, even many documentaries and books that go into deeper investigations don't provide the concrete answers we're all looking for. While they offer more insight and are worth reading and watching, the truth is still hidden from the public eye. The Kecksburg UFO crash of 1965 still stands as one of the strangest, most mysterious events in history. This is just me thinking out loud, but this event reminds me a lot of the 1952 Flatwoods Monster UFO case because of its similarities, but I'll save that for another episode. The reason for including this story in today's episode is the sheer scale of the event. The number of people who witnessed it was staggering. This phenomenon reached farther than Kecksburg. Eyewitnesses ranged from Ohio, Michigan, and up to Canada. That equals thousands of people, and it was also tracked on radar. Unfortunately, the truth behind the object that landed on December 9th, 1965, near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, will never be revealed. In January 1959, the New Richmond Police Department began receiving strange phone calls. It was a cold winter night when the first call came in from a man who sounded panicked and out of breath. The dispatcher on duty, John Miller, listened intently as the caller described something bizarre he had witnessed while walking along the Ohio River.
I can't even describe it. It came right out of the water. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was like some kind of octopus thing, but not from this world.
John tried to get more details, but the caller seemed too shaken to provide more information. He jotted down some notes and filed the report, figuring it was probably someone who'd had too much to drink. But then, not long after, another call came in. This time, it was a truck driver headed to Cincinnati. He too was clearly rattled as he described an encounter at the Little Miami River.
Look, I've been driving these roads for 20 years, never seen anything like this before in my life. I can't even put it into words. It was just wrong.
John could feel the anxiety and the tension mounting in his body. Two separate calls from different areas describing something strange and unexplainable. He dispatched officers to check things out, but they found nothing unusual. At the time, John assumed it was a fluke and a once-in-a-lifetime thing. However, the next day, as John was walking along the street, passing by a newspaper stand, he looked over and saw the headline of the Cincinnati Post and Times-Star. "What is it? Monster churns up the Ohio." To say it shook John was an understatement, and the reports kept coming like an unstoppable flood. No pun intended. Things were about to feel like John was living out an episode of The Twilight Zone. That evening, all the street lamps along Kellogg Avenue mysteriously went out for unknown reasons. The power company at the time claimed it was due to high winds, but John knew the lights were on separate circuits, and there were no down poles in the area. Things were getting stranger by the day, and it really started to put John on edge. He had trouble focusing on his work, but things would continue to escalate. That evening, John received a disturbing phone call, the most detailed account yet. A man crossing the Licking River Bridge called in. He explained to John in horrific detail what he experienced.
Okay, I'll do my best to explain. It jumped out right in front of my car. It stood on two legs. It was taller than my vehicle. When I looked in my rearview mirror, it was moving along the bridge rail. It had to be 3 or 4 times bigger than a man, and way bulkier.
John's mind was reeling. What on earth was going on? Reports kept coming, each one stranger than the last. A woman in Kentucky called and described it as an octopus, whereas another eyewitness provided details that described it as gray in color with a lopsided chest and ugly tentacles. In fact, there were so many of these strange reports that the area was sent into mass hysteria. People thought that it was the beginning of an alien invasion, and armed men were roaming the waterfront trying to catch this elusive creature. But of course, nobody caught anything. Interestingly, even during the hysteria, 5 unrelated eyewitnesses all saw something they could not rationally explain. More so, they all described it similarly. And as soon as this phenomenon washed over the area, see what I did there, it seemed to evaporate in just a short amount of time. It wasn't long before it was forgotten about. In fact, the only reason we know about this strange series of events is that paranormal investigator Dennis Pilchis somehow unearthed these bizarre reports and later published them in his 1978 book, Bigfoot: Tales of Unexplained Creatures. Unfortunately, there aren't many other reports or documentation about this specific time and event. This is really all we have to go by. It has been dubbed the Ohio Octoman, and it remains one of those head-scratching cases that can't be explained. Let's look at it from a skeptical point of view. It is possible that a group of people got together and conspired to falsify eyewitness reports over several days to give the illusion that there's something out there. But seeing as this was the 1960s versus today makes that a lot less likely. These were anonymous, so if it was the attention they were seeking, it didn't make much sense. I find it fascinating that this is one of those unexplained cases that will likely go down in the annals of Ohio history as a mystery. As a bonus, we will travel back in time to the most terrifying eyewitness story to come out of Ohio. An eyewitness I got the chance to interview. I'm sure all of you are familiar with it too. This is Matt Emsch's Dogman Encounter.
So my name is Matt Emsch. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. When I was about 14 years old, me and three of my friends had this experience in the old steel mills down in Youngstown, Ohio. If you go to Google old steel mills of Youngstown, Ohio, you will see, specifically if you bring up the blast furnace and you put blast furnace, old steel mills, Youngstown, Ohio, it'll literally bring up a picture of the blast furnace area where this experience happened. And, I grew up in Youngstown. I live in a suburb of Youngstown now, so still in the area. My friends and I would just basically go everywhere, and anywhere on our bikes or walking. And one of the things that we like to do is we like to frequent the steel mills, because one of my best friends who was there the day of this experience literally lived right across the street from the entrance to these steel mills. So on Route 422 or Youngstown Warren Road in Youngstown, if you look that up, you'll see it's right across from the steel mills. So his house overlooked Youngstown Warren Road or Route 422. You would basically cross the street across from his house, jump over a fence, run across the highway, which was 422, and then we would enter into this area of the old steel mills. And we had to go down a number of different areas to get down there. It took us about a half an hour to get to the blast furnace area, where we basically liked to hang out the most. We checked out the whole area, but we kind of made this one building in the blast furnace area our quote unquote like home base. And this was a 4-floor building that would, if you walked to the inside of it, you could look up and you could see, if you were in the middle of the room, each floor. So if you were up on, say, the 3rd floor, you could walk into the middle of the room. There would be a half concrete wall, and you could look down to the bottom floors, or you could look up to the 4th floor. And it was just an old, rundown, dilapidated building, and it had open walls on the 1st floor. And this is important to the situation. What it had is on the north, south, east, and west walls, it was open. So we found inside of this place these steel, basically the easiest way I could describe it is if you look at old gladiatorial games where they had the shields that kind of wrapped around the shoulders to protect them. That's how these things were shaped. They had hundreds of them in there. So what we did is we took them and we lined them up next to each other, and we made makeshift walls out of this metal, whatever they were. And we made 2 rows. That's as high as we could make it. And we did that, number one, because, it was the time, the late 80s in Youngstown, Ohio was a very dangerous time. We had some monikers for Youngstown that they've gotten over the years that aren't real, something to be proud of. Per capita, it was basically considered the highest murder rate of any city in America at that time, and a lot of gang violence. A lot of mafia things still going on, especially in Youngstown. And, we didn't want to be down there when something was going on and people to see us. We didn't also want the people that worked in the steel mill that still to this day works. There were a lot of different reasons in Youngstown to be careful down there. We would go down there a lot of times armed. We would have guns. We were 14 years old, but we did do it because, you could run into homeless people. You could run into mafiosa that really were down there at that time. You could run into gangs that were doing whatever down there, hiding things or getting rid of bodies, which they found down in those areas over the years. But the thing that really made us most nervous were packs of wild dogs. And, wild dogs in cities that have areas that are not frequented by people anymore, you get, packs maybe 6 to 10 dogs in them, and they are not your, hey, Fido, come here, let me pet you. They will attack, they will kill. And I believe, in this 2-year period that this happened, when I was 14 and my friends and I went down there and had this experience, there were 2 homeless people that were mauled. Those will come into play as well with this experience. It was unfortunately called Murder Town, USA during this time. Per capita, Youngstown, Ohio during different times has had high rates of murder, and that's not something you want for your city or that, but unfortunately that's how it was when I was growing up and my friends were. So we were just very cautious about what we did. We never shot anything or animals or anything. We just would bring guns down there because we just wanted to protect ourselves, and the guns were pretty sorry anyway. We would have, my one buddy had an old 25 that the pin would pop out of it every time it shot. Another guy had a little 22, and I would gank my dad's 38 out of his closet. He had an old cowboy boot in the back of his closet, and he thought he was being slick. Well, Dad didn't wear cowboy boots. So what's that doing in there? There's just one of them. So there was a 38 in there, and we would take it and just have it there for protection. And the time that this happened was we had just gotten out of 8th grade. It was the summertime, so it was really nice and warm. And you know how it is being a boy, Josh. You get let loose from school and you just go buck wild, and you and your friends just want to have fun. And we would go down there, we would break things, and we would just investigate everywhere. And, if our families knew at that time, because they did find out, if they knew at that time we were going down there, they would not have been happy. It was a very dangerous place. You have an old dilapidated steel mill that was utilized, during the strong period of the United States steel industry. And now this was rusted buildings and rebar hanging out where concrete used to be. And, we would be in this one building I was talking about earlier that we frequented as our home base. And once in a while, a big chunk of concrete would fall from the top, floor, which 4 floors, that's a hefty drop. So we had to be careful. And, going up the stairs, say from the 1st floor to the 2nd floor, there was an area where maybe 4 stairs were missing, and we kind of had to hop over it, and there was just rebar hanging out, and that'll come into play as well. And this was a big building, like I said, 4 floors. It had giant concrete pillars in each corner of the room, which also will come into play with description of what was going on when it happened. And these things went obviously from underground to the very top of the building, and they were probably, I'd say, 4 to 5 feet wide and as tall as the building was. So we would have giant fires in the center of this room. There was no shortage of materials that we could find to burn. There was always pallets and things like that. And the night that we had the experience, we had a giant fire going, and we were inside. And it's funny, I've heard a lot of experience with cryptids over time, and you hear people kind of in mindsets when things happen. And I recall before we heard what we heard, we were all kind of just staring at the fire, and no one was talking. And, just kind of, how you get when you stare at fires, everybody just kind of stares at it and you kind of drift away. And we heard this pack of wild dogs. So what outside, you'd walk out and there was a concrete kind of, just outcropping that the stairs had fallen away. And that was another reason why we liked this building, because nothing could run up these stairs. So we had to hop up and roll in to get into this building. So again, No dogs could get up there, and we liked that. And we heard them, and we just kind of were like, okay, let's go outside and see what's going on. We're standing out on this outcropping, and we're watching, and a pack of 6 or 7 dogs run by, and they paid no attention to us at all. And right across from this building was a railroad track. And if you, again, Google blast furnace Old Steel Mills, Youngstown, Ohio, you'll see the picture of exactly what I'm talking about. The railroad tracks right in front of the buildings. And then just beyond them, there would be giant piles of coke, which is basically an ingredient in the steel making process. It's just something that they utilize to make it. And they had huge piles of these things. I don't even know how high. I would say at least 15, 20 feet high, mile each way. So as far as the eye could see, it was just piles of this material. And these dogs ran right in front of our building and made a quick left. They ran across the railroad tracks. They went up the one side of the pile of coke and then down the other side. And immediately we start hearing fighting. We assumed that the dogs were fighting with each other. We had no idea what was going on because they were on the other side. It was dark. We couldn't see. All we could hear is dogs attacking. After maybe 2 or 3 seconds, we started to realize, no, they're not fighting with each other. They're fighting with something else, because what came over the top of these dogs biting and barking was a very loud and deep growl, roar that basically let out, which every one of us, our eyes open, we're like, oh my God, there's something over there. They're attacking something else. And within a few seconds, we start hearing yelping. These dogs are yelping in pain. And then what happened next was when all of the craziness started. And what happened was 2 dogs, one after another, come literally flying over the top of this pile of material. They were thrown, like somebody had grabbed them and thrown them with great force. The first one I'll always remember, it was upside down and its butt and tail were facing us. So it definitely didn't jump. It was thrown and it hit the ground and rolled, and it got up and limped away. Another one came and it hit the top of this, and material went everywhere, and it hit the ground. And I'll always remember this because, I'm a dog lover, I'm an animal lover. It had a huge gash from its shoulder all the way to its midsection. It looked like something had flayed open the dog. And it was still alive. It was bleeding all over. It got up and it ran away. And, I always remember, I was like, oh my God, I hope that dog lives. I don't think it did. It was very, very brutal the way that it looked. And then a couple more come thrown over it. And then the rest of the pack came running. And they all went back the way they came, which was to our left, in the way that we would come into this area. And we're watching them run away. There's blood on the ground. We're hearing them yelp as they run away. And as we're watching in just complete disbelief, one of my friends, I remember him like touching me on my back. He was to my left and behind me. And he goes, guys, what is that? What is that over there? And we all simultaneously looked to our right. And what ended up crawling up to the top of the pile of this material was, quite honestly, something that and I say this all the time, and I'll always say it, it was so big that it looked fake. It was the biggest animal I have ever seen to date. My friends agreed. There were 4 of us again. So we were all able to talk about this for years after this experience. 2 of them are gone, unfortunately. They passed away. 1 is left. And, we always talk about this with each other, or we did. And my buddy that's still here, we still to this day talk about it. And it was basically just a gigantic wolf-looking creature that was on all 4s. We started comparing over time what we could say the size of this thing looked like. And the easiest thing that we found once we started looking at pictures of things, and because, this was in the late 80s, we didn't have the internet and all that. So we're looking at magazines and books, and the shape and the size of this thing was the closest to a polar bear, but it was as big as any polar bear or bigger. And it had the telltale shape of a polar bear, where if you have say like a Kodiak grizzly bear, it's like a walking boulder. Just giant and massive and just boom, boom. This was very sleek, long-limbed, very lengthy, more muscular instead of just big and bulky and long. And it crawled to the top of this pile, and it was watching where the dogs had gone, and it hadn't paid any attention to us. It hadn't noticed us at that point. And what it did next, I've always said this, some people might find this amusing. It was not amusing at all, because of what happened. So this dog was watching them. It was looking in the direction they left, and it lifted its leg and it did its business. And immediately we knew it was a male because of what it did. And what was scary about it was the force at which, when it started urinating, at which it hit this pile of this material it was standing on. Pieces just started going up in the air. You could hear the stream. It was like a hose had just been turned on. And I stepped back. I was like, whoa, that's not normal. It's just so massive, and it was so strong of the stream that this thing let go. I started feeling real fear, because any second it's going to notice us. And just as I'm thinking about that, my buddy who had been to the back and noticed it first started to stumble backwards and fell into that metal makeshift wall that I had been describing to you. And what happened. It made that telltale sign of metal on concrete, and immediately this thing snaps its head and it looks at us, and we all froze, because immediately the first thing that jumped out to all of us was not eye shine. It was as bright as there was a power source coming from inside of this creature. There was a yellow, amber, kind of orange, bright light that was coming from its eyes, and that's where we all were drawn. That's where I was drawn immediately. And it was so big that you could see the anatomy of the eyes. So you could see the pupil, you could see each distinct circular shape of the eye. If you look, if we're just being general about the shape of the eye, you have multiple circles in your eye. You could see each one of them. We are probably about 20-25 feet from this animal, so close but far enough to where we realized the size of it was just so abnormal and so scary that we were just froze. And it started looking at each one of us, and you could tell which one of us it looked at, because its eyes again were just so big, and they were just lit up like Christmas trees. And it looked at each one of us. It looked down the line. There were 4 of us, and when it looked at me, it felt like it was going through me. And what happened next was this thing did something so alien and so insane that it finally took us to things that we had been taught are myths. Things that are just only made for movies or comic books or magazines, Fangoria, or this thing stood up on 2 legs, and it was already so massive. Again, it looked fake. It was just like, this can't be real. I'm sleeping. I'm going to wake up anytime. I have to wake up. But we were awake, and it stood up, and it was twice as big as it was. And it was just so crazy. And we had entered into now everything we've been taught about creatures and werewolves and anything like that are fake. Now we're looking at a real one in front of us. And again, the thoughts going through my head, and I asked my friends later, like, did you guys feel like, we were sleeping, like you were dreaming? And they said similar things like, yeah, like I felt like I was going to wake up at any moment, but then we just didn't. And I kept having this sense of, okay, this is a dream, this can't be real. And it stood up, and it was twice as big as it was, height wise. It had the dog-shaped legs. I remember immediately the thing that stood out to me immediately was, it had a man's shape to it, but you always hear people say, oh, well, it was man-shaped. Well, you can't compare what we saw to a man. There's no man that was built like this. Its arms were so long, that's the first thing I noticed, that they went past its knees almost to its ankles. It had hands that looked very similar, and I got a good look at them a little bit later, and I'll touch on it, but it had hands that looked like a raccoon, like the hands of a raccoon, just giant, huge hands, and massive, just build, muscles everywhere. It did not have long, scraggly hair. I would say the hair was probably an inch long at most. It was actually almost like it was groomed. It was very tight. You could see every muscle. It was as black as any black I've ever seen. It was almost like so black that it was darker than the night blackness behind it. It just stood out. It was so dark. And all you could see are these eyes shining. And it had, huge lats, huge biceps. I remember specifically when I noticed the legs, the quads on it, you could see, any bodybuilder's quads, you see the separation of the muscles and everything. You could see that. But it was so much bigger than any human being you have ever seen. And then what it did was it growled, but it was almost like a growl and a roar at the same time. And the way it came out is, I've seen things over the years. We've heard about infrasound, about how tigers and lions, and they will use infrasound to stun prey. It can actually jiggle the insides and the organs, and that's what I felt, and that's what my buddies felt. I've seen recordings of actually crocodiles and alligators when they do their kind of growl in the water and water bounces off of. It was similar to that, but animal-like, like wolf-like, tiger-like, something of a combination of that. And it went through us all. I remember when it hit me, I felt it go through my chest. And the first thing I felt is I felt like I was going to go down on my knees, my legs from the hips all the way down to my ankles, my calves, everything felt so weak that when you have dreams, when you're being chased by something and you can't run, that's what it felt like. But I couldn't move. I thought I was going to go down on both my knees. I was kind of bent over, but I was still looking at it. My other friend that was to my immediate right later told me that was what he felt similarly. Two of our other friends actually were completely bent over. One was dry heaving, said he felt like he was going to pass out. The other said he felt like he was going to throw up. Something's wrong. What's going on? And it takes a couple steps towards us. And I think the steps of it, moving towards us and how far it moved after it took two steps towards us snapped everybody back into reality. And I remember my buddy right over my left shoulder, who had noticed it first, he turned and ran into the building, and we followed suit, not quickly, as fast as we could. And we just headed up the stairs. We ran to the third floor. I don't know why we went to the third floor. We just did. There was really no way out of there, and I need to explain that too. So going up to the fourth floor, you would be stuck on the fourth floor. You could go out to the roof area. There was a short set of stairs that would take you to the roof. On the outside from the third floor was the fire escape. The fire escape only went from the third floor up to the roof because the second floor on down had broken away and fallen down and was laying in a heap on the ground. All of the stairs were all twisted up in metal and everything. And so we really had nowhere to go. We were standing on the third floor, and my one friend who had noticed it first was going basically postal. He starts losing it. He starts crying and screaming. And I remember, I'll always remember this. I was always a big kid, and I grabbed him out of fear. And I'm starting to sweat right now because I'm thinking about this. It always brings me back. I grabbed him and I put my hand around his mouth, and I grabbed him so hard that I lifted him up the floor. His feet were hanging, and he still, muffled screams, and we all are screaming at him. You got to shut up. It's going to come in here. It's going to hear you. You have to be quiet. I was using choice words, of course. Finally, he started, gasping for air, and I put him down, and, I looked at him, and we'll let you go. Are you going to be quiet? He let him go, and just as we let him go, he takes a deep breath. You hear a thump, the building vibrates, and then you hear the telltale sign of basically nails on concrete. And we all knew what that meant. I knew immediately it was coming in the building. So we're standing, this half wall is in front of us. We're looking down, and all of a sudden, we have this huge fire. It starts to come in, and you got that kind of train effect of, when is a train going to end? That's a long train. Well, yeah. This thing's coming in, and it goes past this makeshift wall that we had created. And the first thing we noticed first was the shadow that hit the wall. Now, anybody walking by a fire, even if you're small, you're going to get a big shadow that gets thrown. So imagine something so big that it looks fake. And that's what we're looking at, its shadow. So the shadow just overtook the entire wall. There really was no shape or form on the wall. It was just black. And then we see the head come in, then the shoulders and the rest of it, and the tail. And as it's walking in, you could see, that like when tigers or big cats walk, you get the scapulas that pop up, in the back. And you're seeing the bones lifting, but they were surrounded by so much muscle that you could see it rippling as it walked. And it's looking around and it's sniffing the air. It's obviously looking for us, and we're all trying to be as quiet as we can, just frozen in place. And, when it got near the fire, you could start to see that it had saliva just pouring out of its mouth. I'm not talking just dripping. I'm talking like the sound of like when you're in an empty building or something and it's raining and you're hearing big drops hitting. The saliva's hitting the concrete as it's walking. And that's a sign that, said to me immediately, it's either going to feed or kill. And that's why it's salivating. And it bares its teeth every once in a while, and you get the glint of this white, and you see the teeth, even when its mouth was closed, the top canines were hanging out, and you would get little glints of the bottom ones here that would show. So its teeth definitely hung out of its mouth, even when it wasn't baring the teeth. And it walked by the fire, and you could see immediately jet black, except for, I thought that it was maybe a reflection of the fire, but we all agreed later that it had a very light white stripe that went from the back of its neck all the way down to the tail. And that was the only other color that this thing showed other than the eyes. You always hear stories about people that see dogmen in the woods during the day, and they talk about the different colored eyes and, blue to black to brown. I don't know what this thing's true eye color was. All we could see was this orange amber color, just literally causing things to light up wherever it looked. So it wasn't eye shine. It was something internal coming out of this thing. And then another thing that really has brought me into believing that these are more than a natural creature, and that there is something supernatural going on, is when it walked by the fire, and its front hands, paws, whatever you want to call them, had touched the ground near the fire, something happened where it only happened with its front left hand, or whatever you want to call it. It basically blinked out. It cloaked for a second. And you could see they see things through it, almost like that predator effect. And when it put its hand down by the fire, something really strange happened aside from the cloak effect. If you've ever seen video of the sun and the magnetic anomalies and storms that they have on the surface of the sun, where you see, the tubes come out of it and the different shapes and magnetic storms, basically that happened right around its cloaked out paw. And it only happened for about 2-3 seconds, enough that I noticed it and my other buddy noticed it. The other two did not. They were at a different angle. And it had basically just looked around the room. It bared its teeth after it sniffed, and it snapped its head and looked right up at us. It knew exactly where we were. It finally caught our scent, and it looked at us, and it looked up at us, and it bared its teeth, and it growled again, and you felt a vibration. But I truly believe that this half concrete wall that we had in front of us had, if it threw that infrasound at us again, I think that half concrete wall blocked it, because we didn't get sick or felt funny or anything. We felt a little vibration. You felt it. Like, I remember I had I think it was my right hand on the top of the wall at that time, and I felt a little vibration in it, but didn't get sick or anything. So I truly believe that wall blocked whatever, because of the angle of it being down on the first floor, us being on the third, and it threw it at us. I truly think it did. And then it stood up again, and it was almost like, like a comic book pose. It threw its arms out to its sides, and its muscles all clenched, and it looked at us, and it growled, and it looked out to the left, it looked to the right, and it saw the stairs on the wall, and it looked back at us, and I got a sinking feeling in my stomach, because I knew what it was going to do. It dropped back down on all four, and it ran for the stairs. And, like I had told you, it was missing 4 stairs, so we had to kind of hop over and climb the wall to get up, and it jumped over that like it wasn't even there. And it was heading up very fluid. Its tail, I remember when it ran, you could tell it utilized it kind of like a rudder. So it was kind of moving. When it moved, its tail kind of bent certain ways. Its tail reminded me of a mountain lion or a cougar. Very non-hairy, short hair, very thick. I remember the bones in its legs and its arms being just gigantically thick. And again, that sense of, not only are we looking at something that's not supposed to exist, the size, again, is just so massive, it has to be fake. And again, this is really happening. And when it had stood up, I forgot to mention this, it had stood up near one of those concrete pillars that I had mentioned the building had in all 4 corners. And we had gone back years later. We never went back for years. And we got an idea of how big these pillars were, which gave us an idea of the size estimation of this animal. And when it stood up, it basically widthwise blocked out the pillar. So it was as wide as the pillar, 4 to 5 feet across. And height-wise, the ceilings were probably where, at the sides where there was floor above. It was probably 15 to 18 feet high. I would guesstimate, and my friends guesstimated, it was somewhere between 10 to 12 feet tall. So it stood up. Its ears probably were at least 12 feet at the tip. And again, I've heard people describe sizes of Sasquatch and other cryptids of massive size. And, people will, well, you were kids. Well, we went back as adults. And I'm telling you, we remembered where it stood and it had to be minimum 10 feet. I truly think, again, tips of the ears, 11, 12 feet tall. Now it's heading up the stairs towards us. 2 of my friends are going, absolutely. 8 ape crap crazy. Running, one is running in circles. The one that I had to grab his mouth, he's screaming bloody murder in circles, just running in circles, going nowhere. And he finally jets for the stairs to take him up to the 4th floor. My other friend runs for the fire escape. Again, you can't go down, so only way is up. And I'm frozen, petrified. My other friend standing next to me, he just said, I was standing next to you, I didn't know what to do. And it made its way from the 1st to the 2nd floor in seconds. And then it started to head up from the 2nd floor to the 3rd. And where I was standing, if anybody would have, this thing or anyone would have walked up to the top of the stairs, the first thing it would have met would have been me. And it would have came within 2 feet of me once it got to the top of the stairs. It got to the middle of the stairs and I started having true belief that this is the day that I'm going to die. I started to think about my family. I thought about my dog, who I loved very much. I thought about, I was getting ready to go into high school to play football at the school, Ursuline High School, a Catholic school, is very big in the sports and athletics as well as academics. And my dad had played there. My whole family had gone there. And I was very proud that I was going to be playing football there. And I thought, I'm not going to get to play. All this is going through my head. It's all gone. And we're going to watch each one of us truly be mauled and killed by this creature, and this is the end. I really believe this was the day I was going to die. And it was probably within 6 to 7 feet from me when I looked at it, and it was looking right at me or at my friend. I think it was looking at me because he was behind me, and I would have been, like, again, the first one it got to. And right at that moment, I will always believe this to the day I die, and the sweat's starting again. I believe there was divine intervention. I truly believe it. I'm Catholic. I'm not a great Catholic. I don't go to church a lot. I don't practice as much as I should. But I think that there was divine intervention, because once it hit that 6, 7 feet mark from me, where if it would have jumped, it would have been on me. We heard that a train. And whenever a train would come by, we would always get nervous, because if they'd see, us in there, or the light from a fire, we'd be in big trouble. They would call the police or whoever, and we'd be in trouble. And we had never, ever had a train go by where they laid on the horn. And it came by, and as soon as it went by the building, be it from the angle the guy that was driving it saw the inside, what was going on, or he just saw the fire, which I seem to think he noticed how bright of a fire we had going in there. He laid on this horn, and this thing stopped right 6 to 7 feet from me, and it looked at me, and it looked back at the opening where you could see the train going by, and we're all screaming bloody murder. Somebody help us, please save us. My other 2 friends are gone. They had, one went up to the roof, the other ran up the stairs. I don't know where he was. My friend and I were screaming, someone help us. And it looked back at us, and it looked back again, and it turned around and started running down. And it took literally, I would say, 1 to 1.5 seconds to get from where it stood 6 to 7 feet from me at the 3/4 mark of that 2nd to 3rd floor step area to the steps of the going from the 2nd to the 1st. And then something else supernatural happened, where you stopped seeing movement of joints and the tail, and it just was a black streak that left the building. And it wasn't just from how fast it was. It had basically gone from physical creature to almost shadow. And it just was just a black mass had just left the building, and it was gone. And I'll always remember that. And as through the years, the things I've been learning, hearing about shadow people and people, very similar things that I saw and we saw when it did that. And we're screaming, and the train just is, ka-clonk, ka-clonk, ka-clonk. And it starts, we're thinking it's slowing down, but it wasn't. And it starts getting farther and farther away. And then the hope of we're going to be saved is slowly leaving us. And then it's gone. And then the fear sets back in that this thing's going to turn around and it's going to come back in and it's going to kill us. And by that time, my other two friends had come back down because they heard the train and they heard us screaming help. And I think that they thought that, everything was going to be all right. And people were coming for us. And they almost, my one buddy almost had kind of almost a half smile on his face. And when we all looked at each other, everybody was pale white and just so weak from the experience already that I wanted to curl up in a ball and just lay there. And the fear set back in. It's going to come back in. And an hour goes by and we're still up there and it didn't. And then we start talking to each other, it's after 10 o'clock. We have to get out of here because this thing's going to eventually come back. And my friend that had lost it and that we had to shut up is totally postal, crying, screaming, I just want to go home. I want my mom and dad. Please, God, help us. And we're trying to calm him down and he won't. And we're like, listen, we have to go. He's like, no, we can't go out there. It's going to be waiting for us. It's going to be there. And we all thought that. But then again, the fear of, as each minute clicks by, we're giving this thing the opportunity, if it did run away, to come back and see if we're still there, or it knows we're still there. It's outside just watching. And we kept looking at the space between this makeshift wall and the opening of the building where there was concrete, looking for those orange eyes shining out there, and we couldn't see them. And it was hard to see, but if it was looking at us, it was so bright, we would have saw it. And so we finally decided, okay, we have to at least go down to the second floor. And my friend is just going crazy, and we're dragging him with us. We pull him down the second floor, and we're probably up there for maybe half an hour. And then we go down to the first, and we said, we have to make a run for it. We have to go. We have to go now. It's almost 11 o'clock at night. We're in an old steel mill in downtown Youngstown. I mean, this is not where you want to be, even if there's not a mythological creature trying to hunt you down and kill you. So we're like, we have to get out of here. And we just remembered then, I remember thinking, oh my God, we have weapons. But I'm telling you, Josh, there is no way on God's green earth that if, even with me having a 38 on me, that it would have done nothing but anger this thing. I thank God we didn't ever pull them out or shoot at it or anything. I don't think we could have even hit it. Number one, we were so horrified. Number two, it would have done nothing. It would have just pissed it off, and it would have mauled us even worse. So we start to leave. We have to go. I am sweating. I'm sorry. Surprised I haven't cried yet. I usually break a little bit.
Oh, dude, your story's woo.
It's
affecting me, man. I'm all choked up. Go ahead. Go. Keep going.
Finally, we start to leave, and my friend is screaming bloody murder. Please don't let us go out there. It's going to kill us. Finally, I grabbed him, and I'm sorry I have to use my language. I grabbed him. I said, listen to me. I said, you are going to come with us, or we're going to leave you here to die. You are going to come with us, or it's going to come in here and it will kill you, and you will be here alone. We will leave you here. You either come with us now or you will stay. And he's screaming, don't leave me, don't leave me. So finally, we turned around, me and my friend. We took his hand, and he grabbed both of our shirts, and he's strangling us, pulling on our shirts, and we had to literally pull him out of the building to get out there. We get out to the concrete outcropping, and the fear sets in also, because what I had forgotten to mention was when you climb up, you could look underneath and it would go way back into the building. So it was very, very reasonable to think that this thing was underneath, waiting for us to drop, and then it would be over, and no one would hear us. It could maul each of us, take its time. No one would have ever heard us. And even if they heard screams in the downtown area or up by the highway, no one would know where they were coming from. So we jump down and we start taking off, and we're going as fast as we can. My buddy's choking us to death. Finally, we get him to the point where he's running on his own, and we're all running together, almost arm in arm together in a straight line. And it takes a half an hour to get to my friend's house from that blast furnace. So that's a half an hour of complete and utter terrorizing fear that we were in, with every noise, every pebble one of us kicked, every time the wind would pick up and leaves would blow, we would think it was there, it was behind us, it was chasing us. We'd turn around and stop and look around. We finally got to the last portion of where we could get out of this area. And what it was a hill, literal hill of gravel and just material that going down was easy. You could turn your feet to the side, standing up, and just walk yourself down slowly. Going up, you had to go up on all fours. And we would always laugh at each other. We would always, make fun of whoever was the first that would start sliding down, because we would always lose our foot. It would always go out from under us, and it would take us longer, and it was exhausting to get up, having this gravel coming out from under your hands and feet. So now we're crawling up this pile of gravel, this huge mountain of gravel, and each one of us at different times, because we're trying to go as fast as we can, start to slide down, and the fear sets in that it's behind us, it's going to get us. And numerous times each one of us screamed, "Is it behind me? Is it behind me?" And you turn around and you look, and it wouldn't be there. You'd expect to see it. We finally got up there. Me and my one buddy made it first, and we helped our other friends. We pulled them up, and we ran across the highway, and we went over the fence and across the street and to my buddy's house that lived across, and his parents weren't home. And I remember, this just always sticks out to me. He had a hose, and I remember turning the hose on, and I just drank and drank and drank until my stomach felt like it was going to pop. And I just poured it all over my head, and each one of us did the same thing. And when we just sat on the porch and on the stairs, my other buddy was in the front yard, and each one of us in a complete and utter daze, not talking for at least an hour at least, staring across out towards where we had come from. We couldn't see the area, obviously, it was so far, but we're just staring just in shock, in disbelief. My one friend who had lost it, he didn't talk for 2 weeks. He had to go start seeing a psychiatrist. I had major problems. I started to go, I'm half Lebanese. We belong to St. Marin's Church. If you're from the Youngstown area, you know it. It's a church there that Lebanese go to. And I went there and I talked to the priest there, and I told him about what happened, and I expected, the priest did not believe me or say anything, and he believed me immediately. And he had told me, "Matthew," he said, "you need to understand something. First and foremost," he said, "God saved your lives." He said, "I believe there was divine intervention." And he said, "Secondly, you need to understand that there are things in this world that most people have no clue about, any idea." And he mentioned exorcisms specifically. And he said, there are demons in this world. In the church, it is well known, you go all the way to Italy and Rome, and they teach, they have their top-notch exorcists that go all over the world for the most horrible demon exorcisms. And he mentioned maybe it was a demon or something, but he had given the impression and that he knew what it was, and he was not surprised at all that we saw something like this. And, the priest had said, sometimes these things bleed into our world, and they take some of us. And some of us are lucky enough to get away, or they just don't bother us. And he said, but there are a long-standing history of things that aren't supposed to existing in this world. And he said, I believe you. And I cried. I broke down. And, it wasn't You know, why would a child go to a priest and make up a story like that? And, you know, we had talked about, obviously, the situation of us having to address this with our families. And we all agreed, there's 4 of us, we would always be with each other when we spoke to our parents together so that we could be there to back each other up. Well, 2 of my buddies' parents had you guys are full of crap. They didn't want to hear it. Just get out of here. Go do what you're going to do. My parents, my mom walked out of the room. You're crazy. She didn't want to hear it. My dad, however, knew me and looked at me and said, well, you know, maybe you guys saw a bear. Maybe it was a bear with mange, or maybe it was, you know, some mutated creature, you know, normal animal, a bear. He kept saying bear because we kept telling him how big it was and what would you compare it to. And we talked about a polar bear. It was as big as a polar bear, but it didn't look like a polar bear. It looked like a wolf, looked like a man-shaped wolf, but it was giant. And he just kept saying, well, you guys saw something, you know, they're 14-year-old kids. They saw, you know, something natural. They just don't know what it is. Then my best friend's dad, who I'm not going to out him, he's passed away. So I'm not going to out him and his family because I'm very close to them. But all I'm going to say is, and any of my friends that see this, they know who I'm talking about and what his dad did. He basically was in charge of the city. He was in charge of the police and many other parts of it. And we told him, his mom did the same thing Mai did. She just said, you guys are crazy. You saw a big dog or whatever. And she left the room and she didn't want to hear it. And his dad, however, got very upset. And he gave us the impression that he knew what we were talking about. And he first and foremost went off on us and said, you know, choice words, what the hell are you guys doing down there? You could get killed down there. The place is falling apart. He said people put bodies down there. There was a couple homeless people that were mauled by packs of dogs down there, and he brought that up, which makes me wonder, was it really a pack of dogs that mauled these 2 homeless men? Was it? I don't know. I don't know. After seeing what I saw and we saw, I can't guarantee it. But he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He warned us, if you ever go back down there, he said, I promise you, I will put you in JJC. He said, you will not play football at Ursula, Matt. He looked at me right. He said, you think that you'll play? He says, your coach will never allow you to play. He'll think you're crazy. He said, you guys will go, you'll go to the city school, which is Ryan High School. He said, you won't go to Ursula. You won't go to that school. You'll go to the city school, and you guys will be made fun of the rest of your lives, and you'll be the joke of Youngstown. And he called my father, and I'm going to say something here. My older sister, I told her about this recently. My parents are gone, and I've never really told anybody in my family about this other than my dad because of what happened when my dad was called to my friend's house. And my sister and I got into it. This was just recently. And she looked at me and she said, what are you talking about? She goes, what do you mean? She goes, how did we never hear about this? She says, why didn't mom or dad tell us about this? What are you talking? You know, she was denying that I'm telling the truth. I'm looking at her, you know, I'm a 50-year-old man. You think I'm going to lie to you? You're my sister. What are you, Chris? So we got into it. And I'm being honest about this. And if she hears it, she can admit it. We got into it. And I was very upset about this. But the reason I didn't talk about it, especially, and I'm sure my younger brother, who's only a year younger than me, is not going to be happy about this when he finds out, because we were best friends growing up. We were inseparable. But when my best friend's dad called my father to come, he sat us down and he talked to my dad. My dad's name was Ken. And he said, Ken, he said, you know the situation here. He said, if these boys go around talking about it, number one, all their classmates are going to go down there. Somebody's going to get killed just from getting hurt from the buildings and everything. He said, secondly, he said, your son is going to be the joke of his school. He won't play ball. And he looked at me and he had this look of, oh man. And he said, you have to promise me that you make your son not talk about this. He doesn't tell his siblings about this. You don't talk to your wife about this. And he pulled my dad aside and they went in the kitchen and they talked. And when I went home, my dad kept looking at me my dad and I were super ultra close. We called each other best buddy. We were close. All of the kids, 5 kids in my family, we all had special relationships with my parents, but me and my dad had the closest. And he kept looking at me with this just fear in his face that I kept telling him, I'm crying hysterically, Dad, you have to believe me. This is what we saw. And he kept looking at me like, Jesus, I think he's telling the truth. And after what my friend's dad said to him is when he really got scared. And he said, you can't tell your sisters and brothers about this. Don't talk about it with my younger brother. He kept saying, don't tell him, because we were inseparable. He said, you can't tell him. He said, he's not going to be able to sleep. You're going to cause problems. So he put the fear of God in me, and so did my buddy's dad. A week later, my best friend tells me he finally got his dad to sit down with him and talk. And he said, he knows what it is. He said he told him that his officers had gotten calls about these things. He had 2 officers that had seen it and that he knows all about it. And he gave him the implication that it at least had killed one of those 2 people that had been mauled in the downtown steel mill area, that were homeless people living in that area. He said he basically told me that he knew everything about it. Don't ever go back down there. You guys are lucky to be alive. And we just were like, whoa, finally somebody is giving us credence and believing us. And I felt this sense of, oh my God, we're not crazy. We didn't see a bear. We're not just little kids that don't know what's going on. This is real and this is crazy. So, over the years, I've learned, obviously been just completely just stuck on what happened. I think about it every day. And the older I've gotten, the more I've gotten more involved in the cryptid community. I met you, I met Josh Turner and Barton Nunley, and I've talked to other people like Wes Germer and Tony Merkel, and these guys all making the same face that you're making right now, a little pale with your hand over your mouth. And this is not, anybody can believe what they want. And I'm talking to anybody watching this right now. I'm looking at you right now. You can believe whatever you want. You can think that this is entertainment, because in the end of the day, this channel's for entertainment. But let me tell you something. I will go to my grave. I'm giving you pertinent, personal information about myself and where I live and my family and the schools I went to and the area I grew up into. This happened. This was real. I have no reason to make myself look like a crazy person or just somebody looking for attention. This really happened. You can think I'm crazy if you want, but let me tell you something. You look at all of the instances of people are having more and more experiences these days, and because of media, we're hearing more about them, and you're getting more information out than ever. There's stuff going on, and I've heard some experiencers out there that it's cringeworthy, and it's obvious they're making it up. But I've heard stuff over the years, especially the last couple years. And when I talked to Josh Turner at Paranormal Roundtable, and he told me about his experience and what him and his cousin saw, it was almost exactly what I saw. And I had never met him before. I had never talked to Josh before until I told my experience. And I got the fear of God in me again. And right now I'm nervous. I have anxiety in my chest. I'm sweating. My shirt's starting to show it. I keep wiping sweat from me. I usually crack a tear or two. I'm surprised I haven't. There are things out there that people don't want to believe are real. There are. And I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just telling you, this is what happened. If there was one person, you can question. There were 4 of us. 4 of us, okay? 4. We all talked about it for years. 2 of my friends are gone. God rest their souls. And they had issues for years. And they started doing other things that ended their lives prematurely that I believe was because of what happened to us. My other friend refuses to discuss it. He has a very successful business. He thanks me all the time whenever we talk that I have the guts to talk about this. He's afraid to talk about it. He to this day has severe PTSD and doesn't even like to discuss it more than 5 minutes. It really happened. I don't know what else to say. I'm not going to make a fool of myself, in front of thousands of people, because a lot of people are going to see this. And I've done other shows and people have seen it. There's no reason for me to lie. And anybody that knows me personally that will see this, you know who I am. I'm not a liar. I'm not a crazy person. I'm not somebody that makes up fantastical stories. This happened. And it almost ended our lives. And people need to know that these things are real. And they're still out there. People are telling, their experiences. And I hear, similarities. I've heard some recently. Some guy mentioned one about the raccoon hands. And that made me stop. And he mentioned a couple other things. And, it was really crazy. And I had... something happened to me. This is the first time I'm ever going to share this. I've never shared this on any other show. About 3.5 weeks ago, almost a month, I had a dream that was the realest dream I've ever had in my life. Normally in your dream, when you think you're at home, it's not your home. I was at home. I was in my backyard. I heard something. We have woods behind our house. I heard something in the woods. I went to the woods and, I lost my right leg below the knee last April. I had some complications, health issues from surgeries, and I have a prosthetic. And I remember something attacked me from behind and threw me on the ground. And I saw what it was, and it was what I saw all those years ago. And it ripped off my pant leg and it threw my prosthetic into the woods. And then it got on top of me and it crawled over top of me, and it was 100% the thing I saw when I was 14. And it crawled over me and the eyes were glowing and it was dripping saliva. It dripped in my mouth. And I've gagged telling people this story a couple times. I tasted it. I could smell it. It looked at me and it did what I've heard people mention some cryptids do, which is mind speak, basically talking to you in your head. And it put its head maybe 2 inches from me, and it looked at me and it started speaking to me in my mind. And it could have been just the ultra realistic dream, but I'm telling you, then it was the realest dream of my life. And it told me in my dream that I've been talking too much about it, that it's been looking for me for a long time, and it was there for me all those years ago, and that it will see me again someday. And then I woke up and I was sweating. My puppy, her name's Hadley, was at the foot of my chair. I was soaking wet. She was standing there. She's normally never there. It was like 3:30 in the morning. She's always up in bed with my wife. And she's at the foot of my chair whining with her front paws on my legs, looking at me like, what's wrong? And I'm telling you, maybe it was just an ultra realistic dream, but I'm telling you, it was the realest dream I've ever had in my life. And it was 100% what I saw all those years ago. Now, maybe it's just because I've told the story a few times. And I'm sorry, it's not a story. It's an experience. I have to designate those two, because there are stories out there and they're just that, stories. This was an experience. And maybe because I had been talking about it recently, I'd met you for the first time at Josh's cryptid conference in Texas, and I met people there that had seen things, and I don't think it was a dream. It was too real. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. That's basically what has gone down. I've had some other things happen. I think I told you, I even sent you an audio clip. I had went to Beaver Creek State Park. If I didn't, I'll send it to you. I had went there for a Bigfoot conference a few months ago, which is in Ohio. The night before the conference, I had met a guy named Johnny Freeman, who's a psychic. You can look him up online. He's on Facebook. He came up to me. I never met the man in my life. He came up to me and told me I needed to go up this sketchy trail. Now, I had just had my left knee replaced. I have a prosthetic on my right leg. He tells me I need to go up this trail. There's supposedly a portal up at the top of this trail. And I looked at him, and first I'm like, you know, he has his hand on my arm. I'm like, bro, slow your roll. I don't know who you are. What are you talking about? I can't just go up some trail. I've got half a leg. I just had my knee replaced. He said, I'm sorry. He says, I've never seen someone with an aura like you before. He says, you need to go up this trail. There's a reason. And I go up this trail. It took me probably 35, 40 minutes. And nothing visual happened. At the end of me being there talking out loud, I made an EVP. I'd never done an EVP before. I've seen all the ghost shows and everything. And I pulled out my phone and I started recording the app. And I basically had asked questions out loud. And this is online. You could go to Cryptid Creatures, which is another cryptid site, where my buddy Todd Erie and Brian Brock interviewed me. They upped the sounds on this recording if you want to hear it. And I'm not trying to plug somebody else there, Josh, sorry.
No, you're don't worry about it, buddy.
It's on there, and you can hear it, and you hear basically a grunt, which everybody I played with, from Ron Moorhead, who is a legend in the Bigfoot community, to Martin Groves, who is a legend and is like a father to me, and I love the man. We've talked and sat down. He has, in my opinion, the most memorable, most insane experience of dogmen and Bigfoot that you've ever heard, if you haven't heard it. We sat down at the conference where I met you, and we became very close, and we looked at each other with fear in our eyes because of the similarities to what we had both seen. And we had never met before. So, you know, you hear on this thing, you hear a grunt, you hear wood knocks. I didn't hear them with my own ears. You can hear them on this recording. Martin Groves will tell you about him and I, and about us meeting and the similarities. And it's not fake. So that's what's happened. I've had some crazy stuff connected with me through the years. I've always had a sensitivity to things. I've noticed details that most people don't over the years. And I freak my family out sometimes doing things. And I don't know, maybe it's just I'm sensitive like some people. And, you know, there's that veil that break our world from the supernatural world. And I think some of us are just capable sometimes to see things that others can. I think that this thing broke through, like my priest told me. It bled through, and we just happened to be there. It did not like that we were there, and I think it tried to remove us. And that's what went down, and that's what I've gone through over the years, and things are still kind of happening on and off, and nothing of that severity, but definitely weird.